The vinyl revival. This is just so wrong on so many levels. So I made a video called The Cassette Revival. This is just so wrong on so many levels. In the video, I talked about the several levels of technical issues from which the compact cassette format suffers. All of them factual, all of them real, and all of them easy to hear and find problematic. To be clear, I didn't say that anyone was wrong for using cassettes. I talked about my points of dissatisfaction. I'm not interested in telling anyone what to think or what to do. What I did get from the comments, however, was a sense of how a lot of people have an affection for the cassette format, despite its technical shortcomings. That's fine. I have an affection for growing pumpkins in my garden, even though I hate the taste. Please don't comment on pumpkins. So to vinyl, specifically to the so-called vinyl revival. Is it pointless? Shouldn't we all be listening digitally in the third decade of the 21st century? As in my cassette video, I need to give a sense of my own perspective. I had a tape recorder as a kid. My parents wouldn't let me get a record player because they thought I would waste money on records. That's fine. But I persisted and I was able to get one and even set it up in the living room when I was about 16 or 17. And I didn't waste money on records. I invested it in my experience of music and my personal growth as a music lover. I could have bought one of the early hi-fi cassette decks, but I already knew that the cassette sound was inferior to vinyl. And in any case, I was able to get records of classical music, which was my interest at the time, sourced from Eastern Europe for 5 shillings each, rather than the £2 that a pre-recorded cassette or full-price record would have cost. But it didn't take me long to realise the problems of vinyl. Fast forward to 1980, 1981-ish, when I could afford full-price records and had quite a reasonable collection, and had started my path in pro audio. I attended a demonstration of the forthcoming compact disc format. The format at that time was a 10cm disc, not 12, and 14-bit, not 16. But I loved it right from that moment. So I stopped buying records instantly. I knew that what was on the horizon was a format which, in comparison with cassette and vinyl, had 0 faults. A format that was just the music, pure enjoyment without irritation. I bought the original Philips CD100. As soon as the price came down to £300 from the introductory £800. Adjusted for inflation, that's nearly £3,000 today, or around $4,000 US. Oh yes, I'll be making a video on CD soon. The CD revival must be just around the corner. So what's wrong with vinyl on so many levels? Level 1. Come on, it's the scratches. I might have had my criticisms of the cassette format, but it didn't suffer from scratches, clicks and pops, or a stuck groove. Vinyl was definitely a monster improvement on shellac 78s, but it isn't the toughest of materials and it's easily damaged. I have a 78 player, by the way. It's in the loft right now, but it's one like this. A 78 revival? Maybe. If you wanted to hear a record without scratches or without what we used to call surface noise, there was a way to do it. Simple. Buy a new copy of the record and play it on a pro turntable, like an EMT. A new record hasn't had time to suffer any damage other than its initial mechanical insertion into its inner sleeve and your careful first-time extraction. And the Pro Stylus in the Pro cartridge of the Pro turntable will plough its way through the groove like a tank through a hedge. The downside is, in my own experience, such a turntable will wear out the record after multiple plays and you'll soon hear distortion. That's my experience with a Pro turntable, so if your experiences differ, let me know in the comments. I said Pro turntable, not hi-fi turntable, by the way. In the real world, however, you'd buy a record and enjoy it a couple of times. Then you'd hear surface noise, then there'd be a scratch, then the dust would settle. Before long, the record would be agony to listen to. Now, there will be some people who will say, you should listen to the music, not the noise. If you can do that, fantastic. I envy you. But I'm trained in pro audio. I'm trained to listen for the defects. Pro audio is different to high-end hi-fi, by the way. In pro audio, a defect is something you can actually hear. No, I fully agree that the ability to listen to the music and ignore the noise is a great talent to have. I just don't have it. Level 2. Level 2 for me has got to be distortion. For a clean sound, the stylus has to follow the movements of the groove precisely. Any deviation and you get distortion. Distortion adds frequencies to the signal that were not present in the original recording. Harmonic distortion, where the added frequencies are whole number multiples, can sound pleasant in a way. But vinyl distortion to me sounds harsh and gritty. So how do you get distortion-free playback? Simple. You spent a lot of money on your cartridge and arm. I come from the era when hi-fi meant a Shure V15 cartridge in an SME 3009 arm, and a lot of setting up with the aid of a protractor. Yes, a protractor. But to my ears, it wasn't distortion-free. But technology moved on, and I remember going to a hi-fi show in round about 2002, 2003-ish, and the sound of vinyl was streets ahead of what I remember from the olden days. Level 3. Professional reel-to-reel tape normally runs at 15 inches per second. It can be 30 for even better quality, but never less, unless for economy or getting a longer duration from a single reel. So how many inches per second is vinyl? In the immortal words of Lennon and McCartney, we can work it out. A 12-inch record is 12 inches in diameter. I know I'm stating the obvious, but sometimes the obvious is worth stating. The circumference of a circle is pi times the diameter. So the circumference of the first groove is around 38 inches, in whole numbers give or take. A 33 1/3 record rotates 1.8 times a second. So with my trusty Casio, I calculate the Stylus-to-groove speed as 21 inches per second, somewhat in advance of Pro Tape. But that's not the end of the story. The circumference of the groove decreases as the record plays through. At the extreme inner groove, the diameter is 4 3/4 inches. So again, with the calculator, the Stylus-to-groove speed is just over 8 inches per second. Actually, that doesn't seem too bad compared to tape, which I said earlier could be run at 7.5 inches per second if there was a pressing reason. But magnetic tape seems to cope better with squashed up waveforms than vinyl. Vinyl is mechanical, so there's stuff moving, rubbing and grinding, and the stylus struggles to follow the undulations of the groove, causing distortion. Add to that the problem of geometry. The cutting head in the lathe that cuts the original master runs parallel to the groove. There's probably a better way of saying that, tangential to the circumference or something like that. Suggestions in the comments, but you know what I mean. With a conventional pickup arm, the cantilever of the stylus is only parallel to the groove at one point during playback. At all other points of the record, it isn't. We call this tracking error. This is one reason why mastering for vinyl is such an art, to get all the necessary compromises in perfect balance for optimum listening. Digital mastering engineers only have to worry about getting the track so loud that it blows your head off. That's sarcasm, by the way, no need to comment. Level 4. For level 4, I choose noise. Actually, apart from clicks caused by damage or surface noise caused by dust or wear, vinyl is an amazingly quiet medium. But I can't let its shortcomings go unchallenged. 18 minutes per side. I don't remember exactly who it was who said that, but he was a famous producer. He reckoned that for optimum sound quality, there should be no more than 18 minutes of music on each side of an album. Actually, I'd say that's a good thing. I'd prefer 36 minutes of good music on vinyl to an hour and 10 minutes of mostly filler on CD. The reason for this is that the groove moves from side to side, taking up space. To optimise the noise, the groove has to swing widely. To get more duration on a side, the groove needs to be constrained. Cutting lathes, however, can be clever, and some can kind of nest the groove so that the maximum amplitude of swing can occupy the minimum of space. However, the fact remains that there has to be a compromise between noise and duration. It's part and parcel of the vinyl medium. I'll circle back to what I said at the start of this level. Coming from its roots in shellac 78s back in the 1940s, vinyl is an amazingly quiet medium. But what about rumble? I'll cover that in a moment. Level 5. Record players, or record decks if you want to call them that, don't like vibration. So if you like to walk around the room while listening, and some people do, then your footfall vibrations will travel up through the floor, up into whatever your record player sits on, through the plinth and platter and into the stylus. Your thump, thump, thump will be faithfully reproduced through your loudspeakers. It can get worse. Do you want to listen really loud? Well, pump up the volume and pump it up a bit more. You'll get feedback, just like in a PA system, except in a record player it's normally a much lower frequency. The solution to footfall and other vibrations in the floor, perhaps from traffic outside, is to suspend the turntable. This should help with feedback too. So between the plinth and the turntable are springs to even out any vibration. This in itself isn't a total solution because, as you might know from your car, springs also need shock absorbers to dampen out the resonance that otherwise occurs when a mass is supported by or dangled from a spring. Okay, this isn't rocket science, and the suspension normally works well enough to reduce any problems of vibration into insignificance. But it's worth a mention. Also worth a mention, just because I wanted to mention it, is that your turntable doesn't actually need springs. There's an alternative that some would say is better. And that's to make the plinth out of a great big heavy concrete block. If the concrete, or granite, or marble, or diamond-encrusted ruby, depending on the severity of your vinyl addiction, if it's heavy enough, it will resist any vibration you care to throw at it. No springs required. Level 6. Yes, as I said, the vinyl record is amazingly quiet, but what about the turntable? I used to have what is now considered a classic turntable, the Garrard 401. Oh, the rumble! The Garrard 401 is an idler wheel design. The spindle of the motor carries a rubber disc that presses against the inside of the turntable, and the turntable goes round. But even very small irregularities in the idler cause low-frequency vibrations in the turntable, which are picked up by the stylus. Rumble is, unfortunately, amplified by up to 20 decibels by the RIAA equalization in the preamp. Fortunately, direct drive and belt drive turntables don't suffer rumble to the same extent, although there still can be audible rumble from the turntable's bearing. In a direct drive turntable, the platter's attached directly to the motor, so there's no idler wheel involved. High-end hi-fi enthusiasts, however, have beef. Cogging is the issue. Cogging is where the motor has a number of poles and there's a kind of stop-start effect. The more poles the better, the fewer poles the worse. As much respect as I have for high-end hi-fi enthusiasts, I'm not one. I honestly can't say I've ever been aware of cogging. If it exists as a real thing, then surely a test record playing a simple sine wave could be analysed with a spectrograph. If the spectrogram shows multiple frequency components other than a little harmonic distortion, which we expect, then there's cogging. If it shows only the sine wave frequency and a few low-level harmonics, then cogging doesn't exist. I have no data nor experience on this, so I'm open to persuasion. But for now, I suspect that cogging, there's no such thing. So what about belt drive turntables? Surely they must be the ultimate in hi-fi, with zero defects. I'm not sure whether belt drive turntables are supposed to suffer from this more than idler wheel or direct drive, but I'm guessing that any turntable with a lightweight platter would. Stylus drag. If you start up your turntable and press your finger on the platter, you'll see it slow down because of friction. It's the same with the stylus. Even though the stylus presses down with a force of only a couple of grams, there will still be some friction and a tendency to drag the turntable in the opposite direction to its rotation. Now, I'd say that any competently designed turntable would be powerful enough so that any drag would have no effect whatsoever. But a high-end, hi-fi enthusiast would also worry about the elasticity of the record. Stylus drag could deform the record temporarily as the stylus passes. But here's the killer. According to some high-end hi-fi enthusiasts, the amount of force created by the drag varies according to the complexity of the signal. So it isn't just a matter of a slight and consistent slowing down of the turntable, it's an active cause of distortion. But as with cogging, I've never been aware of any ill effects of stylus drag. Or maybe it just gets mixed up with the other distortions of the vinyl medium. As with cogging, I'm open to persuasion, and I'd love to hear effective demonstrations of both or either. Level 7, and this will be the last for now, mistracking. The extreme case of mistracking is when the stylus leaves the groove. It might skip forward or it might skip back, in which case you'll hear the same groove over and over, the proverbial broken record. This can be caused by the stylus force being too low, the turntable not being level, or the bias not being set correctly. Or the record might just be difficult to track, which is down to the compromises made in the vinyl mastering process. One cure for mistracking that I have seen is to tape a coin to the head shell. Oh dear. But mistracking occurs at a lower level too, particularly towards the end of the side. It's heard as distortion, particularly in the high frequencies, and can come across as shrillness or sibilance, or just plain distortion. And as the stylus mistracks, it gouges the groove, baking in more and more distortion. Again, this is something for the vinyl mastering engineer to deal with, who may be fortunate enough to work with a Neumann lathe with an acceleration limiter. The acceleration limiter, however, introduces its own kind of character into the sound. Some people like it. I think I should probably stop now. There's a lot more I could say about vinyl, and in this video, I've only just scratched the surface. Do you see what I did there? My opinion, though, is that vinyl has so many problems that simply do not exist in digital audio. I understand that some people have a love for vinyl, and in some ways I do too. But if I want to listen to music and enjoy it to the max, for me, digital is the way to go. I would appreciate your comments because they add to my personal perspective. I have another video planned on what's good about vinyl and what we miss out on when we listen digitally. I'm David Mellor, Course Director of Audio Masterclass. Thank you for listening.